So now on to the next part. So you can see this part still has a little more information that I need to add to it. So it has this little like bevel window, it comes around here, and it has this area where these buttons kind of fall onto. So I'm just going to come back to the Polymesh 3D again and import in my next shape. And so these shapes right now, they if you see, these are the appended ones that I'm going to add to this. So this creates this area here, the area around the window, and the area around the button. Now if I turn on the polyframes right now, you can see they're all different polygroups. So basically I want to get all this stuff kind of as a positive add, and then this one is a subtractive. So this is, if you bring in stuff into ZBrush and you want to kind of group them together, this is how you kind of do it. So basically I just want to isolate this one here, so that was just literally Control Shift and clicking, which will isolate it first, Control Shift click again, which will just show everything else, and then I'm just going to group all these together into one polygroup. So coming down here and just doing a group visible in the polygroup tab, and so now all this is one polygroup and this one is a second polygroup. So basically I've taken the the polygroups that I had originally, which was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 polygroups, and turned them now to 2 polygroups. And so that when this is going to allow me to do, when I group split this now, I'm going to get all these kind of positive shapes as one subtool, and then this shape as a second subtool. So now coming back up to our top here, I'm going to go back to the actual radio, the initial part here, and I'm just going to append in this new shape here. So they have been now into the actual object, and then I'm just going to group split this so I get that division of the polygroups we just set up. So you can see here's that -1, and then here's the +1. Now one little nice thing that I like to start doing using DynaMesh Subtract is actually start coloring this object as well, and this lets me kind of establish masking areas on the model later on when they actually get turned into low-res geometry, if that is a necessity to your actual object. So one little trick to do this is actually, if I have an object in the spotlight here, so if I hit Shift Z, if I have the actual wheel showing, so just hitting Z again and bring this wheel up, I can now color pick off this object. So if I just hit C, you can see I can actually start color picking. You see the color change over here, different areas on this image. So this is a good way to kind of bring in reference and then grab the actual color of an object inside of ZBrush. So just make sure you're in Spotlight, and then you have this actual Spotlight icon showing. If you hit Z, it's going to hide that, so just make sure you have it showing by just hitting Z. And then you just color pick with the letter C, and then if you hit Shift Z now to hide Spotlight, you now come in and you actually see that your object now is colored based on that. So basically I just want to make sure I have this actually baked in, the color baked into the object as well. So I'm going to go up to my main shape here, and I'm just going to do now a color fill object. And this is going to take whatever color you have selected over here and actually fill your object with it using the colorized information of the model. And so I have that part, and then I also want to colorize this part to kind of match it, because if you look at the radio, they're actually the same color, and it's just two objects kind of attached to each other. So I'm just going to make sure I have this one colored too. And so now I have those kind of mapped out, and then I come in and I'm actually going to color these bolts differently so we can kind of get a clarity on them. So back into Spotlight, hit Z, and then I'm just going to color pick off the metal here, and then just do a color fill on that. And then for the little gaskets as well, we're going to come back in and we're just going to pick this kind of black rubbery material here. Hit Z, color pick off that, and then just do a color fill on that too. So just starting to color fill, our different elements here, just so we kind of get those borders kind of established. So back to the main shape here. Now if you noticed in the actual radio, the screen has a different color than the actual surface here. So if I merge these two objects together, I'm going to then have to come in and kind of manually paint this area out, which is a little bit of a time-consuming process. One quick thing that you can do with this is use these objects before you actually group them together with DynaMesh as kind of like masking constraints or masking elements. So going back to my image here and turning on Z, I'm just going to color pick this screen here and then return to my model. Now making sure I have this main object selected, I'm just going to choose the standard brush, turn off Z add, and just turn on RGB. And then I'm just going to paint on the surface of the model here. So you can see if I have solo on here, that object isn't attached yet, but I'm using it as a border guide or as a guide to actually allow me to kind of define this edge with color. And so this will help me in the end of the object to kind of use this as a mask, and it's getting it extremely clean. So you can see I'm not really concerned about the edge border of it, as long as it's still going to be hidden by this actual piece of geometry that I'm going to append together to make a positive shape. So I can still paint on the outside, if I'm being sloppy, but just color picking the main here with C, and then just kind of bringing that back in, I can get this window kind of established really quick. And you can see I can make sure that it's touching the edge of that actual object all the way around. Now if I DynaMesh this first and tried to do this, I'd have to do a series of masking or other kind of techniques to try to make sure that this window or the LED panel only happens at this edge here and doesn't crawl up the border of this actual window. So this is just another quick trick you can kind of do using objects before you DynaMesh them together to kind of hold different color areas on the model. So now if I take this and have my my appended shape here as a positive and just do a merge down and then re-DynaMesh, you can see that separation is now nice and clean. Now the resolution stuff here you're seeing here is because my DynaMesh resolution was low. So if I undo this, and this is just another example, you can change this at any time. So if I up this to now say 768, make sure blur's off, and re-DynaMesh, I'm going to get a much cleaner edge along that side there. So just you're not set to the resolution you initially start with your DynaMesh. You can always increase it as you build. And then just doing a quick clay polish on that to kind of solidify those edges. So you can see this window now is right up to that edge, and this is still one solid watertight mesh here. So you can see it's bumped right up, and it's all DynaMesh together, so it's all nice and pretty. So now we have to make this little subtractive cut here. So going back up to the subtool palette, picking that, and then moving it up so it's underneath my top tool. Now this one, it is a different color right now, so we actually probably want to colorize it as well. So I'm just going to come here and color pick off this and just do a color fill on that. Once you start using color, you often want to keep using it, because if I would carve this out with a different color, and then I'm going to have to go in and repaint it. So just make sure if you start doing the color stuff that you continue doing it on anything you're doing the DynaMesh subtract with. So now just making that a subtractive form, make sure I have my top tool selected again, doing a merge down, and then just re-DynaMeshing. And there we have that main shape, all finished, all nice, and really clean and really precise. So I'm just going to go through and do a few more options. The procedure is pretty much the same for all the different parts that I created on the radio using DynaMesh subtract. So coming back up here again, I'm going to go and grab the Polymesh 3D and import in another object, which is buttons. Now these buttons, if I turn on polyframe here quick, you can see that all these buttons are different polygroups, and then all the text is different polygroups. So we want to separate this again down to 2 polygroups so we can do a subtraction from the buttons with the text. So just holding Control Shift, I'm just going to isolate the buttons really quick, or hide them, and then down in the polygroup tab here, do a group visible, and so that's going to get all that text to be one group. And then Control Shift to show everything, and then Control Shift clicking just the text to isolate it, clicking again to hide it, and then just group visibling all the buttons. So now I have this object set up as 2 polygroups that I can now use a group split on. Now for the other processes, we usually would go back to our main shape and merge these buttons in. Since they're in the same space they need to be, and when I append them to the object, I can do the subtraction process in this file. This file is getting quite filled with subtools, and as I get more and more parts added to the actual radio, my subtool list is going to be pretty long. So you have the option or the ability to do the DynaMesh subtract stuff in another kind of file, and then append them into your main file after you have the subtraction done. So just another way you can kind of organize your scenes and kind of work more efficiently without having to worry about all these various subtools in your main file. So back to the buttons, I'm just going to group split these quick. And so now I have the buttons and then the text. And so if you look at the buttons, you can see these have a little tessellation around the edges, so I need to subdivide those a little more. So just going to divide those up. until they're smooth all the way around. And then I need to DynaMesh these. So I'm just come down to DynaMesh. I'm going to try a resolution at 512 here. I may actually have to go higher and turn blur down and then DynaMesh. And if I look at it now, that looks pretty dense. It should be enough resolution to carve out that text onto these buttons. One thing I want to do too with this is, since I want that text to be white, I'm going to actually set up the coloring right now. So I'm going to come back to Spotlight here using Shift Z, and then hit Z to get the wheel back, and then just using C color pick this color right here that's actually on the knob, which should be the same color as the buttons. Shift C to hide that, and then just doing a color fill object on the buttons. Now I'm going to go to the text, and I'm going to fill that with white, and then do color fill object. And so there we have the text is now white, and the buttons have the darker color that we color grabbed from Spotlight. So now I'm just going to set the text to a negative option, go to my main button, do a merge down, and then just re-DynaMesh. And as you can see, I now have those buttons. I'll turn off the poly painting here. I have the buttons carved, or the text carved out of these buttons, and also I have now transferred that color from that text through DynaMesh Subtract onto the buttons. So now I don't have to paint these. They're done. Like, these buttons are final, they're ready to go. And so now I can just come back to my main shape here, do an append, and append those buttons in. And since I had them positioned, already where they needed to go, I now have final buttons on my object. So extremely precise, extremely quick, and extremely accurate. So there we have it. So that's the basic workflow of using DynaMesh Subtract in ZBrush 404 with imported objects. The rest of the radio was generated the same way, so each of these individual parts generated simply with primitives and DynaMesh Subtract. So this was a simple cylinder object that then had two cubes kind of subtracted from the sides, and then a little complex like cylinder and cube shapes to cut that part out. And you can see I started using that same colorize process using Spotlight to generate the color for that. And if I go through and some more of these, this shape around here, if I isolate that quick, this was just a cylinder, and then just literally using DynaMesh Subtract cut out a quick cross shape in it. And as you can see, these shapes are extremely clean and extremely precise. It would have taken me a long time to generate these shapes in any other 3D packages. So basically that's the whole functionality of it. You can start getting really complex shapes really quick, just using ZBrush and this new DynaMesh Subtract feature. So I hope that helps, and keep watching for more videos in Z Classroom.